Okay, excellent. Well, good evening, families. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for Job Hunting and Interview Techniques. It is my honor to introduce our speaker tonight, James Devine. He is a lifelong music educator and storyteller who believes in the power of laughter, learning, and legacy. He's a husband, father of four, and proud grandfather of 11. He teaches middle school music at a Title I school while also writing, speaking, and podcasting. He's a graduate of St. Joseph's College and the Army School of Music with service in Virginia, Japan, and Colorado. James retired from the Colorado National Guard in 2006 and holds a master's in music education from Southwestern Oklahoma State University. So, families, please join me in welcoming James Devine. Excellent. Thanks so much, James. Take it away.
All right, thank you so much for having me today. I'm going to cover four basic things, and we'll go into all of these in quite some depth. What to do to prep before the interview, what to do the day of the interview, what to do during the interview, and then what to do after the interview. And then I'm going to close with some job hunting math that I think will help you whether you're looking for a job or if you have a teen looking for a job. In any case, there's a lot of misleading things that some people sometimes think. So let's talk about the prep to do before the interview. You really want to research the company. Now we'll talk about whether this is your first job or a lead on job because you might look at it differently depending on that. But many people they just take the first job that comes their way and when you're looking for your first job, I think this is actually something that you should do. If you're looking for your first job and or you've been unemployed for a while, then you should take something that is just a job to take and then find out what you're good at and what you're going to get better at and what you like about that job and what you don't like about the job. But if you're going to your second, third, fourth, fifth job, you should start thinking about what are some of the things that you're looking for. I know a young lady who gets so excited about a new job and 1 week later, she quits. I think the record is she was at one place for half a day one time. And the first 2 years that I knew her, she probably had 8 or 10 different jobs. But the problem wasn't that she was afraid of work. She worked hard. The problem wasn't that she didn't make a good impression at the job or at the interview. What would happen is she was not a good fit either for what they were looking for or the what she was looking for. So sometimes they would quite not fit what her mission in life was. So learn about their mission, their values, their culture. Is it something that you feel like you can support? Now, we're not talking about if there's something illegal or immoral, you definitely don't want to do that. But the whole purpose, if you get to a business and you find out it's not going to align with what you believe in, then you should leave. I remember when I was about 18, I applied for a job and it was for these burglar alarm, fire alarm things. And I really believed in the mission of what they were doing. But when I went to the training session, they were telling us how to handle it if people were worried about what the price of it was. And there was a lot of guilt trip training happening. For example, they would say, well, what price can you put on your child or what price can you put? And I told them I kind of disagreed with that. And the guy doing the training, he said, well, you can leave. And so I was actually glad because I only wasted 1 or 2 hours of my life going through the training instead of getting into it and finding out they were going to pressure me to do that. So I retired from public school in 2023, and I'm still teaching. I teach at a charter school, but I got tired of the lip service that the school I was at paid to parents. They said that they partnered with parents, but they didn't really follow through on that. There was a lack of discipline follow through. And so I knew that I did not want to go to another place like that. And so this charter school that I teach at now on their website, the very first thing that they listed was something that was very important to me. And they listed that the parents are the first and most important part of a child's education. So I knew then that that aligned with my vision and purpose in teaching. And so I applied for the job, and they follow it. They actually believe what they say about that. So think about ways you can research the company. You can review recent news projects or achievements that they've done. Are they controversial? Are they facing controversy in the press? And I'm going to say controversy is not necessarily bad. It depends why they're controversial. If they're doing something that could be bad or is unethical, then that's one thing. But sometimes a company can be controversial because they're standing for the right thing. And then you might say that aligns with what I'm looking for in a company. Or sometimes because what they do works. They're controversial because of that. People say you can't do that. It's that's not how it's been done, but it's working or it's cheaper or it's better, and people want to put them down sometimes. My own teaching career has been sparked by controversy at times. I've started teaching at some places, and the administration has said, you know, kids are wanting to quit your class. You're losing band students that had been in it before. And sometimes it was because they weren't willing to follow the new standards because I set pretty high standards for the students. And so I would ask the admin, give me time because every school I've been at, I've been able to triple the number of kids enrolled in band. But sometimes years 2 and 3 were sometimes lower than year one because it was a process of building. And some admin supported that and some didn't. So find out what the your boss is going to believe, what the company believes, and if they're going to follow through on that. Understand the job description thoroughly. I think this is where the young lady that I knew, I think this is where she failed. She would just say, I need a job, I need a job, I need a job. And she didn't think about what the actual job description was. And did that fit in with her skills? Does that fit in with your likes and dreams and desires and goals? One of the cool things about this charter school I'm at now, I feel like I've been really good at building band programs, and I got to start one from scratch at this particular school. I'm in my third year there. I was very excited about that. And once again, if you're looking for your first job, do whatever you need to get into the job market as long as it's not illegal or immoral. Because during that time, you're going to discover what you like, what you don't like, and that will carry with you, that info will carry with you to your next job. Um,
James, quick question in the chat.
yeah.
Vicky was wondering, how do you judge what's right in reference to controversy? How do you kind of break that down?
So I think everybody has a guiding principle in their life. For me, it's my faith in God. And so that's how I judge whether something is right or immoral. And for me, if something, even if it's legal, but it's not doesn't seem right to me or is misleading, then that ends up being something that I don't want to go to. And that was one of the things with that fire company. I did not like using scare tactics to get people to buy a product. The product should be able to stand for itself. So I retired from teaching and took this job at this charter school, and it was a half-time teaching job. And so the other half the time, I was self-employed, thinking that I thought that was something I wanted to try to pursue, but I found out that I didn't like it, and so I began a quest to fill that other half of my life. So recently, I've been in this job hunt thing myself, and there were many things that seemed like a good. There were many times I was actually offered something. I was looking for something to fill the other 20 hours of my life because I'm at this school for about 20 hours. There were times I was offered something, the pay was good, the schedule aligned with my schedule at the school because I didn't want to give that up that halftime. The mission was meaningful. I liked the boss in the interview, but the job description and the 10 things in the description, maybe one or two of the things fit me well, and the other things were things that were outside my wheelhouse. Now, once again, I'm at a different level of my career. I'm at a point where I'm looking more for what the main things that I can use my skills for. When I was 20, things were a lot different in what I was looking for in a job at that time. Ultimately, these part-time offers that I had, I ultimately turned them down until I found another private school. So I'm actually a teacher at two schools now. And the second school, I get to do the exact same thing I was doing at the charter school. It's a private school that had no band program. And I've been there about 8 weeks now and got to start a program from scratch. That took me a year to find that, and I found out that I'm really good at doing that, starting programs from scratch. So my conclusion for this is to, if you're looking at your first job, take almost anything that you're offered, and as you progress through your career, seek jobs where you get to use more of the gifts that God has made you strong in. So it doesn't mean that every minute of every day is going to be overjoyed with work. But in my 40 hours a week of teaching, I would say that 36 hours of that is areas I'm really strong at and get to use my strengths. There's a few things each week that aren't in my strong area. Usually they involve going to meetings, but that's a pretty good ratio there. 36 hours of loving things and 4 hours of enduring things. But sometimes when you're first starting out, it can be reversed a little bit. Any questions about that section? All right, we'll move forward then. The next part is to know your resume. This is still under the preparation before the interview. Whatever you put on your resume, be prepared to discuss every item that you list. Don't just put something because your friend told you to put it there, or you just put it and you don't really understand what you yourself wrote. Highlight your experiences that match the job requirements. Some say that you should tailor the resume for every separate application that you do. And I think if you're doing different, if you're earlier in your career, and you're just kind of looking at a broad range of career choices, then that might be true. But I think if you were looking at something more specific, so for in my case, if I was looking to be a music teacher, my resume is going to be pretty much the same for all of those jobs. But if I was looking at being a corporate trainer, which would still use my teaching skills, I would probably adapt my resume for that. Definitely, the cover letter should be adapted specifically to the position that you are applying for. You should draft, you can use an old letter as kind of a draft and then put in details that are specifically related to the job. So if they say, for example, we're looking for someone who can come in and make sense of our financial mess that we've allowed to happen. They wouldn't say it that way, but if they were to put that in there, then you want to put in the cover letter how you can help fix that mess for them based on your skills and experience. I'm going to be honest here for a minute. I strongly dislike how every job, it seems like, has become an online application. The I don't think those online applications really allow you to show your skills and your talents off. And they often automatically kick people off whose resumes don't have the right keywords. So that's something you have to kind of look at with a keyword because oftentimes it's these days it just gets scanned into a computer. And if they're looking for a certain license or if they're looking for a certain skill and you either neglected to put that on your resume or you don't have that skill, it sometimes automatically bumps you off. And sometimes this is just because of the hard the numbers of resumes that some companies are getting. I have a horror story about 2018, I think it was. I was considering getting out of teaching and going into the corporate world to be a trainer. and I filled out an online application and submitted my resume. And it took me about an hour, hour and a half to do all that. And I clicked submit, and I immediately got an email back. Now, that's not unusual. It's usually when you submit the online application, you'll get an email saying, "Thank you for your application. We are going to be reviewing these and we will get back to you." What made this one unusual is this one stated, "We have thoroughly reviewed your credentials and have determined you don't meet our minimum requirements." And it's like, really? You thoroughly reviewed it in 2 seconds? What it was is they were looking for someone who had a top secret clearance or some type of clearance. And because I had checked the box that I do not have that, then it automatically bumped me off. But I just remember thinking, why didn't you have that as the first question and then bump me off? So sometimes you'll find funny things like that, but don't let that discourage you as you're doing your hunt. Sometimes writing a resume is an act of interpretation, and I'll explain a little bit what I mean. I spent 10 years in the Army band. I could just say that, but I had to kind of interpret that into educator language when I was going into teaching after the Army. So I mentioned on my resume that I performed in the Army band in 150 plus concerts every year. But then what I focused on was everyone in the Army has a secondary job that you do. You could be a cook, you could be a person in the band, you could be an accountant, but even all those people have a secondary job that they do. And mine was in the training department for our band. And we had to do the Army training just like every soldier has to do. And so I helped to provide that training. So I expounded on that in my resume that I focused on training soldiers in the 30 common tasks we had to pass every year, ensuring that they achieved the Army standards through their training. Um, and I put on there that I had supervised 10 soldiers because those things are things that made more sense in the civilian world than they did in the Army. Someone who's coming from the Army, they might put, "Oh, I spent 10 years in the infantry," and someone in the outside world doesn't know anything about that, doesn't know what you did. They're just thinking you shot a gun, but you may have had to budget and plan for meals for 20 people. You may have had to make sure millions of dollars of equipment got to the right place at the right time when you were going on duty somewhere else. And so think about all those things that you did and translate them into the job that you're applying for. And I highly recommend that you get expert help from someone who is in the field. In my case, in 2005, I was having a fairly major transition. I left the first school I taught at, and I was looking for another school. And the best thing I ever did was a friend of mine who worked in HR. He looked at literally hundreds of resumes every week, and he gave me a lot of feedback on my resume and totally revamped it. And those were some of the tips he gave me about translating my Army experience into educator language. Um, and so you have to think about that. You might think to yourself, "Oh, I don't have any skills or I don't know anything." That's usually not true. I've seen young people who take the volunteer work they've done and they're able to put the 8 bullet points of what they did as they volunteered for Habitat for Humanity, and that they contacted people to help or whatever they did, and they worked on different projects. And then I've seen others who just put, I worked at Habitat for Humanity, and they didn't give any details, and it doesn't look as good. Both of them did the same thing, but one of them knew how to write about it and one didn't. Um, my friend who looked at my resume, he even suggested that I get out of teaching, not because he thought I was bad, but he's like, "Here you have a bachelor's in business and you have all this experience in teaching and training." He said, "You should become a corporate trainer." And he told me what I could make if I had become a corporate trainer, and it was very tempting, but I really loved working with kids And so ultimately, I made the decision to stay in education. And this has been 28 years now in education. And I absolutely love it. All right, the next step you want to do is to prepare some answers to common questions because you're going to hear some version of these questions at most interviews. Here's one that you might hear. Tell me about yourself. Very open-ended, very easy to answer. There is no wrong answer. How can they don't, you're talking about yourself. How can there ever be a wrong answer? But they don't need every detail of your life either. So you got to have the right balance here. Um, my mom was really bad at this, providing every detail of her life thing. When she would go, for example, towards the end of her life, she had to go to the ER quite a bit for different things that happened. And the doctor would say, "What? Well, Rita, what brings you here to the ER today?" And she would start with, "Ever since I was 5 years old." And it's like the doctor didn't have time to hear that, and the interviewer doesn't want to hear about what you did when you were 5 and 6. So make it short, keep it meaningful. You can share about your family, your hobbies, maybe a short history of what got you to where you're at today or why you're seeking this job. So for me, I always shared I that when I was 17 and I worked with some young kids, I knew that was when the seed was planted for me to become a teacher because I loved it so much and I knew that was what I was going to do. And then when I was in the Army, the training day on Thursday, usually it was assigned. It's like, okay, Sergeant Smith, you have to do the training. Oh, do I have to? And I always volunteered. Let me do it. Let me do it because I would rather be up in front of the class than listening to someone read to me is what usually happened. The people who didn't want to teach, they would just read out of the book to you. The ultimate time that I realized it though was when I was about 22 and I was giving the bomb training. And now you have to realize you touch a bomb once. For most people in the Army, you touch a bomb once in basic training. And then the rest of the time you're simulating that you're throwing a bomb. So I set up this little course. We had the fake bombs, fake foxholes, but I set up a course where they had to try to throw it and get it within the target. And my fellow soldiers were all commenting. They were like, "This is the most fun we've had on training day since we can remember." And for me, it was easy to do. I just tried to make it as realistic as I could with what I had. Another question you might hear, why do you want to work here? Here's a good response to that. I love the company's mission. I've read the job description and it looks like it fits me well. I'm good at doing all the things that you're looking for. My friend Bob tells me he gets to work with wonderful people in this organization. Um, little side note here, most jobs that you will find are actually going to be either someone you know who knows about the job or someone you know who knows someone. Even in my own case, my first teaching job, my my neighbor was the principal of the school and his daughter babysat for us and he knew I was a musician and so he said, "Hey, we have a band teacher opening. You want to apply?" And that was my first teaching job. My second teaching job, one of my coworkers, oh, I'm sorry, not one of my coworkers, the father of one of my students at that school taught at another school and he knew I was thinking about leaving the first school and he said, "You should apply there." So once again, that was a direct connection. Um, the third teaching job I had, a friend of mine knew the principal, and that's what got my foot in the door and ultimately got me hired. This last job that I was at was the first time that I didn't know anybody personally and was hired just based off of applying and going to interview. Something you don't want to do. So yes, you want to say when someone says, "Why do you want to work here?" You don't want to say, "Well, I need a job." That's going to put you down at the bottom of the list right away. Or you pay more than my current job. or especially this. I've heard horror stories of this, usually from the younger generation. I heard you have a lot of time off. That's not the time. The interview is not the time to discuss those things because it's going to put some red flags or put you at the bottom of the list for possibly being hired. Another question you might hear, a common question, is what are your strengths and weaknesses? The strength should be an easy one to answer unless you haven't thought it through. So think it through, write down some things that you think you're strong at. If you're not sure, ask your friends, your parents, people who have been teachers, ask your coworkers, because they'll usually have some insight into what they think that you're good at. When I was leaving the Army, I took a job skills test, and there were some things that were not surprising at all on there. It said that I would be a good teacher, no surprise for me. It said I would be a good musician, no surprise. I just spent 10 years in the Army band. And the one that surprised me was it said that I had the potential to be a restaurant manager. And I was like, what is that about? That never was on my radar. I never thought about applying for something like that. But when I shared that with my friends, they were not surprised by that. And as I thought about it, I was no longer surprised either because I'm a big people person. I like to meet new people. I like to train others, and that's what a lot of restaurant managers do. However, restaurant manager didn't really fit my lifestyle. Weekend hours, long hours, late night hours. And so that's why it never registered in my brain and why I still never have looked at something like that. But I could see why it came up high in the possibilities after I took that strength survey. Your weaknesses, that's harder to talk about. Don't let it trip you up though. Give some thought to it, what your weaknesses are, and reframe them as something positive. I'll give you my own. Um, I have trouble sometimes setting and sticking with boundaries. And it's because I care so much about my students. And I found out a few years ago that high school band directors actually have one of the highest divorce rates. I don't teach high school anymore, but I can see how it can become so all-consuming that people's relationships suffer. So when I'm asked to share my weaknesses, I reframe it as this. I say, I care so much about students that if I'm not careful, I will spend too much time helping them be what they were meant to be. And I have had to learn to set time boundaries and turn off my computer by a certain time and not have email on my phone. So that's how I've reframed my weaknesses because those are still weaknesses that are in the back of my mind, and I can sometimes see myself getting too busy if I'm not careful, taking on too many things. Another question you might get, another common question is describe a challenge you faced and how you overcame it. Once again, it's something you should think through. I'm a strong believer in writing things down with a real pencil and real paper. And so you can put together a little notebook, your job search notebook, and you can write down your strengths and your weaknesses and maybe some of your achievements or the answers to some of these questions just in bullet points so that when your mind goes blank, you can glance at your bullet points and at least have something to say. For me, I used to have very poor classroom discipline when I was a young teacher, but I became a student of classroom discipline. So this is how I answer people if they ask me what is a challenge I overcame. And I studied about classroom discipline. I asked questions. I observed other teachers. I observed people whose classes were failing. I observed people who had smooth running classes. And I became an expert at classroom discipline. So much so that by the time I interviewed for that second school position, I had a very strange interview question. And they said, imagine it's May, the end of the school year. It's the night of your concert. and students are running all around the room, not listening to anything you say. They're hanging from the ceiling, they're crawling over the top of the lockers. What would you do? And that was very puzzling. And I thought about it for a long time. And finally, I said to them, I said, I would never let it get to that point. And they all were like, phew. And they almost said they didn't. It didn't quite happen like this, but they almost shouted, "You're hired!" And I found out later that this was a real situation with the director before me. And but my what I tell people now, because inevitably as a teacher, one of the questions is, how do you handle classroom discipline? So I tell them that I avoid 97% of discipline problems before they even happen. And I do that with proper routines and expectations. But it wasn't something I knew early in my career. So for me, that was a big challenge I overcame. I've rehearsed this a lot and have given a lot of thought to it. But if you can't think of what a challenge you've overcome is, you want to have something ready. Now, you may get totally prepared and you go to an interview and they don't ask you about that. But these are just some of the more common questions that you'll hear. I've heard all or some of them in almost every interview I've ever been a part of. And later, when we get to the job hunting math, you're going to hear about how many interviews that I've been to. You also want to prepare questions for the employer. Ask them about their company culture. Ask them about the possible growth opportunities that are available there. Ask them about the role's daily responsibilities. Sometimes they might have a job description, and really the daily responsibilities have their own job description that may not fit with that. Here are some questions that I have asked when I've been in an interview. I've asked, what are the three main qualities you're looking for in an employee? I've asked them, what is the biggest thing you hope to accomplish through this position? And once again, I write these things down with a pencil in my job hunting notebook. That way I have it available when they say, "Oh, do you have any questions for us?" Or maybe a question might come up as you're interviewing, and you can write that down as it comes up so that you can ask it later. That I've had that happen before too, to clarify something that they were looking for. And then lastly, you want to practice. You get better at everything with practice. You become better at music, you become better at playing basketball, become better at your relationship with a spouse, you become better at being a parent. All these things by practicing them. Some words that I've always hated. I used to hear it more when I taught high school students, and they would say, "Oh, I'm just going to wing it." That is a guarantee of failure. And usually the ones who winged it went who I don't know how to say that, who did wing it, they usually did not do very well. So you can conduct mock interviews with a friend or mentor. Sometimes if you're younger and just coming out of college, sometimes your college will organize things like that for you. Record yourself, check your body tone, your body language, I'm sorry, your body language, your tone of voice, and your clarity in your speaking. Are you speaking clearly? It's so easy with a phone these days. Just set up a phone as if the phone were the person interviewing you, and then go back and look at it, and you're going to notice some things. Maybe some people, they get nervous, and when they're nervous, they're scratching their nose all the time, or they pull their ears, and you may realize that, and it's like, oh, I got to make sure I don't do that for the interview. I was on the second school I taught at. I was on the interview committee when we were looking for a choir teacher there. And I was so surprised at some of the people that came to the interview. One was late and was flustered. We forgave her for that because we were in a newer building and the GPS didn't always work. But if she had followed something we'll talk about later, she probably wouldn't have been late. Um, One of them, when we would ask her different questions, um, she always responded with, I don't know. Every single thing we asked her, she responded with, I don't know. It's okay to do that if you really don't know, but you should try to answer the question if possible. One lady, when we asked her why she was leaving, she responded with, "Well, I don't get along with my boss." And that's not a good way to respond. Even if it's true, you have to twist it a different way. Um, how to frame it in a good way. So a good answer to say is that it's time for me to grow with some new challenges. I've used that line for years, and it's suited me really well. And every job that I've had has had different challenges that have helped me to grow as a teacher, and as a person. Any questions for the things to do before the interview?
What do you say when you're interviewing and somebody says something like, well, you seem to be overqualified? Because I feel like underqualified or overqualified and not enough experience are justifications for not hiring people. But if you hire me, then I can get the experience. And then as far as being overqualified, people are motivated by different things when they apply for jobs. Some people are looking for a better work-life balance. Maybe somebody is overqualified, but have needed to step back in their employment roles to become caregivers to their parents or to, be engaged more with their children or whatever personal life things. But I feel like those for me personally are trigger words, and I don't know how to address them in the best formal way in a job hunting search. So I was wondering if you could shed light on that.
I think the overqualified part, I think sometimes you can address that by having a different resume for every position you apply to. So if you have your doctorate in philosophy and you're applying to be a tutor at a school, they that might be something they said you're just here in the back of their mind. They're thinking you're just here until you can get that thing that you're going to use the doctorate of philosophy in. And so maybe you can leave that off. It's not being dishonest by leaving it off of your resume. And you can just focus on work with children or whatever in that case. Because like you said, someone might just say, you know what, I'm tired of working in that field and I really want to step back, or I've been out of the workforce. I think for the lack of experience, that one is a little bit harder to overcome, and you can just communicate the best you can with I'm a quick learner. I like to learn new things, and each of my jobs I've done this and learned these things. And so that may be some way to overcome in that area. All right, any other questions? All right, let's go ahead and move on to day of the interview. This unfortunately needs to be said for some people. Dress professionally. Choose something that's appropriate for whatever industry that you're going into. If you're in doubt, go dressier than you think that you need to. I feel like you can almost never go wrong overdressing or dressing too nicely. When I was in the Army band, one of my commanders always had the band in the next higher uniform than everybody else. So if they were in their dress, we called them Class A's, were the suit looking uniform in the Army. If they were in Class A's, we were in blues. If they were in blues with tie, we were in blues with a bow tie. If they were in their fatigues, we were in our Class B's, which is kind of like a shirt and pants type of uniform, like a business attire uniform. Um, so I would say jacket and tie for guys, a skirt and blouse for the ladies. Don't be afraid to show some of your personality. The second job I interviewed for, I wore a Mickey Mouse tie. I think I have one on now today too. And the one of the interviewers said, wow, you seem pretty confident to come into a job interview and you're wearing a Mickey Mouse tie. But it was to teach high school. And so I wanted to show the fun side of my personality. And he took it as a positive. Someone else could have taken it as something as a negative, like, oh, you shouldn't do that for a job interview. If you're looking for a job as a chef, and they're hiring right away, you might want to show up in your kitchen whites and be ready to work and have your knife set with you or whatever chefs do. And landscaping, same thing. You might show up in your work clothes and your steel-toed boots so you can be ready to jump right into the landscaping job. So those things are going to make more sense depending on how the position is advertised, exactly what they're looking for, and whether they're saying hiring immediately, come dressed for work. You'll look at those things a little bit differently. Make sure whatever you wear, make sure that it's clean, pressed, and fits well. My wife and I have a great aunt who passed away about 20 years ago now. And she would always talk about having visited Italy. And her generation, she would be about 110 now if she were still alive. But her generation, you didn't wear jeans for anything. But she always commented on how the Italians made the jeans look so good. I heard that from her at least a dozen times. Some jeans are extremely big that I call them dad jeans and they look really tacky. They just look messy. And in general, don't wear jeans, but maybe the job is appropriate for it. Because I'll give you an example in the early days of web design, about 1997. Believe it or not, there was a time when there was no internet. I walked into a company that was designing my website and it was filled with about 20 young people. These were people in their early 20s, and they were all wearing jeans and professional looking t-shirts. But they weren't dressed fancy, but it seemed appropriate for that environment. So much so there was even a that at that time when they had these young people who would pore over the computers and not take breaks. A lot of these places would hire a grandma type of person who would make sandwiches and make sure that these young people were eating and not just working on the computer till they passed out. So it can be different depending on your industry. You can get advice from people you who are around you who are in that industry, or see what it looks like when people are getting ready for that. This next one is very important. Arrive early. I always aim for 10 to 15 minutes early. You probably know people, like I know people, who seem to be perpetually behind in everything that they're doing. They're always in a rush to get to the next thing. They're never on time anywhere. And it's like if they just get caught up one time by 15 minutes, maybe they'll be on time. It seems stressful to me. I live in Colorado Springs, but there was a time when I was in the National Guard, I had to commute up to Aurora once a month for our drill weekend. And I commuted with someone for a few months. And I finally had to stop commuting with him because we were rushing into the parking lot with 2 minutes to spare. And it was just too stressful to me. It's like, no, I want to get there. If I'm going to Aurora, I want to get there about half an hour early. And so I just quit commuting with him. I'd see teachers, I work with teachers all the time who are at the copy machine 2 minutes before class starts. And when the paper jams, they're getting all flustered because they need that right then in their classroom. And I print out my stuff after one or two times of being flustered like that. I started printing out my stuff about a week ahead of time so I don't have to be worried about it. Then if it's jammed or it's not working one day, then I only get it 5 days ahead of time instead of a week ahead of time. If you get there early, you can sit in the parking lot for a little bit. You can review your questions you've written down. You can think about the interview. You can just take a breather and be prepare yourself mentally for the interview. You can pray. Just anything that you want to do to prepare yourself for the interview. Allow time for unexpected delays, traffic, weather. Colorado Springs traffic, it keeps getting worse and worse these days. I want to say, I'm not saying this as a brag, but just saying how that it can be done. In my 39 years of working, including my time in the Army, I've only been late twice. One time I missed a train in Japan, an early morning train, and the next one wasn't until half an hour later, and I was still only about 4 minutes late to getting to work. And once I had a flat tire, I changed it, and I was about 10 minutes late that time. So it can be done. There's going to be things that happen that we can't control, but if you're perpetually living a life of being behind, it may have a negative impact on the interview process. And then this one, I'll just say that I've been guilty of this, and so this is from experience. Don't eat strange foods right before you do an interview because you don't know in what kinds of unexpected, uncomfortable ways they might affect you. And I didn't do this one, but this kind of fits along with that. Don't drink a 7-Eleven big gulp when you get there 15 minutes early, right before your interview either, because you're going to have to run to the bathroom during the interview. Bring essentials with you. Some things to bring would be extra copies of your resume, a notebook and pen. Um, Take notes, bring your notes with you. Write down questions if they come to you during the interview so that you don't forget them. Bring your reference list. Some places ask you for a list of references. Some people put them on their resume. Some people put them in the cover letter. Some of the online applications, you have to already put those in for the application. So it kind of depends on what you're looking for with that. Any questions about um, before the interview or day of the interview?
I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but I just want to throw one more thing out there, that if you're not familiar with the location, you might want to practice driving there or taking the bus or something beforehand. I one time in high school could not find the location of a building for a job that I applied for, and I never got the interview. So
Oh, that's too bad. You never got to the interview at all?
no, I couldn't find it. I had to call them, but no one was in the office at that time.
Oh
So by the
no.
time I finally reached them afterward, they said, "Sorry, we already filled the position." So
Oh no. And some
learn.
buildings, that is true because I've been to some buildings that don't make sense, or it's like it has a number for you to go to, but then there's this huge complex, and it's like, okay, what building am I supposed to go to in this huge complex? Because it just brings you to the main building. All right, during the interview, remember that first impressions matter a lot. So offer a confident handshake. I greet each of my students. I teach middle school, and I greet each of them at the door of my classroom every day and shake their hand because I want them to get practice at shaking hands and become confident at that. And most of them are pretty confident after a few weeks of doing that. Smile and make eye contact, especially as you become older. I would say 50 or older. I've noticed this with myself too. If you don't consciously try to put a small smile, I don't know if it's gravity that starts affecting our faces, but we can look like we're grumpy even if we're not. And so just making you don't have to be like this, like a really fake smile, but just having a little effort to smile can work really well. Use the interviewer's name, and this goes back to that notebook you bring in with you. Write the name down. Maybe if it's a weird pronunciation, you can ask the receptionist or someone beforehand, how do I pronounce this name? Body language. Make sure you sit up straight. Don't cross your arms. A lot of people are like this a lot of times. I used to do concerts full time right after I got out of the Army band. And I was in a small town in Colorado called Akron, Colorado. And during this concert, the entire audience they were kind of like arms crossed, little grumpy look on their face. Their mouths were turned down. And I thought nobody liked this concert. And I had about 10 or 12 people, some of them that had the worst posture, come up to me afterwards and, oh, you really blessed us with your music. We really loved what you did. And I was like, you weren't showing it. You weren't showing it when I was playing the music. And if when the interviewer is talking, nod and show engagement and show them that you're listening. You might even once in a while say something that shows that you're agreeing with something they're saying or that you're hearing them. Answering questions. You're going to get a lot of questions in the interview. Be concise but thorough. Try to stick to whatever the question. If you don't understand the question, ask them to rephrase it in a different way for you. Try to highlight relevant skills and achievements that pertain to what they're asking about. So I remember one time I went to a school, I applied at a school, and I was going to be the orchestra teacher, and I had never taught orchestra full time. I had one orchestra class, but I had never taught beginning orchestra students. And so they questioned me about that. What are you going to do about that? And so I told them about learning how to play guitar because I had taught a guitar class, even though I had never played guitar and found out that was part of my job requirement. So I was about 2 weeks ahead, but I learned and was able to teach the students and had a very successful guitar program. So highlight the skills and achievements as they relate to that. And then lastly, show enthusiasm. Um, Express genuine interest in the role. You may not be the best fit. That's okay. That was something the hardest thing for me to learn. I've struggled with self-esteem my entire life. There's various reasons for that that we won't go into here, but I've gotten better as I've gotten older. And as I've gotten older, what I realized too is that sometimes I could be having a great interview. The people interviewing me can really love me. I can love them and love a lot of aspects of the role, but realize that it's not necessarily the one for me. It might not be the best one for me, or there might be someone more qualified than me. In 2005, I was hunting for a teaching job, and for a while I was getting discouraged because I was not getting a job offer. But I had some interviewers who were nice enough to call me and say, "Hey, we just want to let you know you interviewed very well, but we had to go with another person because they had a little bit more experience in this area. But I just wanted to call and encourage you." And that was a big encouragement to me when people did that. But most of the time, they're not going to do that. Relate your career goals to the company's mission. One time I was at a job interview and I knew for sure that I did not want the job. And I remember as part of the interview, I was giving them some tips on what they could do to make their job hunt more successful. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I just know I think they were asking too much for a music teacher. There were like 20 things they wanted to accomplish. And it's like, really, you should drill this down to the two or three main things you want to do because you're not going to find someone who fits all of this. And I hope that they took some of that advice to heart. After the interview, make sure to thank the interviewer while you're there. Thank them, express appreciation for the time that they gave to you. Reaffirm your interest in the position if that's something you're interested in. You can even reaffirm you're not interested, not in a rude way, but just that. But that might come afterwards as well too. I've learned how to be a good leader from good and bad leaders, and you can learn something from every interview you're a part of. It can be something you learn about yourself, something you learn about the company, and you're like, I'm glad I don't think I want to work for that company. It just may be something you learn about things in general, about how things work with that. I found out some things, and these are some things that are probably unique to teaching. There are sometimes, this probably isn't totally unique to teaching, but sometimes they open a position up, they already know who they're hiring, and it doesn't matter how good you do at the interview, they've already decided who they're going to hire. I had a friend one time who I told him about an opening I saw. He was a retired band teacher, and I told him about an opening I saw, and he said, "James, don't even apply for it." I said, "Why not? It seems like a really good position." And he said, "Well, they've had the same person there for 10 years. but because it's a position that gets funded year by year, they have to re-interview, and they have no intention of getting rid of that person who's been there for 10 years, which is a shame. To me, that's a dishonest tactic because people are going hoping for the job, and there's not even really a chance for them to get it. But you just have to know sometimes that those are the cases and situations that are happening. Send a follow-up email. This is best if you can do it within 24 hours. Mention something specific from the conversation that you've had um, as part of the interview. Keep it professional, polite, and short. And maybe this is where you express your interest. Hey, I'd love to talk to you further if you have any other questions for me. I think that you should also send a written thank you note. This is something that people don't seem to do anymore. I keep a bunch in my drawer, right here by my desk. They're cheap to get a thank you note like this at the dollar store. You can get a packet of 10 sometimes, and just send a note. Even if you know you don't want that job, just as a thing of courtesy, because you never know when something will might open up that maybe they can't hire you, but they know someone else who's looking for the same thing, or they know of a position you'll be exactly right for. It'll make you stand out. But here, I'm going to say something weird here. Don't send it just so you can stand out. It has to kind of come from your heart that you're thanking them for their time and effort that they put into you. And then reflect on the interview. Make a note of what went well. Identify areas that you want to improve for your next interview. Any questions about anything we've covered? The next part I'm going to get into is what I call job hunting math. It's kind of some personal stories of what worked for me.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't have a question really of what you covered recently. Um, so I'm older, Generation X, like I'm sure you might, and looking for jobs when I was a kid was so much easier than today because of that computer thing. Everything goes into the abyss and they don't even tell you they received the application or they pick somebody else or anything. So super frustrating in the way that is. I'm wondering if you're going to cover some of that because that's just no bueno in today's world, I think. Of course, you always get a job from someone you know or somebody they know, but if you're just out there for a job, it is so tough.
It is. I
In
would
my
say that that's one of the hardest things about today's market, because I've read a bunch of books, like some of them say do something different, like even if they say don't show up, show up. And I've found that people these days don't like any of that. If you do anything outside of the box, then most of the time that company is going to just cross you off their list. When there was a time where if you did something creative, it would give you a little extra boost. I would say that the thing I'm about to cover with the job hunting math, that could be something that could help. And then also literally let everybody you know that you are looking. Um, when before I got this second teaching job, I was spending 2 mornings a week going to networking meetings. And as part of these meetings, there would always be business owners who would stand up and they'd say, "Hey, I'm looking for 2 more people in my company, and if you know anybody, let me know." So if you just let everybody know, and maybe even if you think about there's job hunting where you already have a job but you're looking for something better, so you have less time in that case. But then there's job hunting, I don't have any job right now. If that's the case, if you make job hunting your full-time job, spending 30 or 40 hours a week doing that, and getting sometimes away from the computer and getting to people you know and trying to connect with them, I think that can always be helpful. Any other questions? All right. So when my own kids, my kids are it looks like someone raised their
Yeah, I
hand.
was gonna say James. Yeah. Maybe Jody.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I do HR and I do hiring. And and it was interesting. My husband and I both went through career changes a couple of years ago. I think the Lord sent us through that so we'd had to have empathy for what our kids go through in this modern day. But it's interesting to be on the other end and looking through resumes every day. And one thing I think that stood out I've seen on resumes, because I'm kind of making notes for my kids and stuff, a picture helps. It's amazing how much that can communicate because we can't have that face-to-face interaction anymore. And so a picture really does say 1,000 words. So include a picture on your resume. And as well, the challenge that is on the HR side, why people don't get responses is because nowadays you have to go through so many resumes and so many of them are just junk because they just want unemployment and they're not serious about getting a job. And it's really easy just to click a button and hit apply. So it's almost like you're bombarded and trying to sort through who is a good applicant. And so, you know, that's the challenging side on the HR, and you just don't have time to get back to everyone because technology is so easy to click buttons for submitting a resume. So anyway, I just wanted to add that little tidbit.
Thank you so much. And maybe you should teach us next time because I bet with HR experience, you've got a lot of insight for things. And I would say that the jobs that have a few more hoops to jump through probably have a better chance of your resume being read by someone. Because like you said, I know like at my own school, they've tried things on Indeed and they've been very frustrated because they're like, well, we got 200 applicants and none of them are qualified for what we're looking for. And it looks like Aisha has her hand raised.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of see what you thought about putting a picture up and, address some concerns because there are statistics about people not being hired because of whatever their last name may be or whatever they look like if they are wearing a hijab or something like that. And so I'm just kind of wondering, while I understand the pros, I'm wondering if there's a way to address and overcome some of the cons of sharing a picture.
That's a really good question. I've never put a picture on mine, so it's hard to gauge what that would be. So this is this could I hope this doesn't come across in the wrong way, but sometimes what I've heard some people say is that if a place is going to be discriminatory, it's not a place that you want to work at anyway. And but that can be hard too because it's like, well, how many people might be discriminatory? So I've sometimes included pictures on my cover letter that were of students that I had permission to like use the students' pictures, kind of showing me in action, but not actually showing me. Um, but yeah, you're right. There are some people who are going to assume if you're a certain color, if you're a certain age, if you're a certain background, if you have a certain name, there's going to be some people who make assumptions and they shouldn't. But unfortunately, we live in a world where some people do. I don't think I answered your question, and I'm sorry. I don't know what the answer is. All right, let's talk a little bit about job hunting math. When my kids are in age right now from 38 to 28, I think. And grandbaby number 11 is on the way right now, I think. I think they're at the hospital. But when my kids were teenagers, not that long ago, they would sometimes say to me, Dad, there are no jobs out there. And I would say, well, where have you applied? Well, I applied to Taco Bell and I haven't heard back. Okay, you got to do more than that. Or the I applied to Old Navy because I really like their clothes, but I never heard back from them. And that's not enough. I was coming of age in 1982, 1983. About that time was when I got my first job. And I didn't study unemployment then, but I just know from history we were coming out of a recession. And when I looked up the stats last week, during that time, unemployment was between 7 and 9%. And I was able to find a job. I found a job. I was working in restaurants and things that weren't the most appealing, but I was never without a job from the time I was 16 until now at age 59. The current rate of unemployment is 4.3%. And the experts, whatever that means, the experts say that anything below 5% is full employment. And so I know like in my field in education, we have trouble filling a lot of the positions that are available. Even some of them stay open for a year or two before we are able to fill it, or we just sometimes give up and put that time and energy in a different direction. I found my first teaching job by accident. Now, I don't believe in accidents, and I don't believe in coincidences. The ancient Hebrew doesn't even have a word for coincidence, but I was performing full time and not making quite the money that I needed to make to support my family. And I would not have sought out a full-time teaching job, but money was tight, and I had actually started delivering pizzas part-time to make ends meet. I hated it. I didn't really enjoy that, but it was something that brought in some money for a little bit. And at the time, they used to have permanent signs up above saying, hiring delivery drivers now, and it was a permanent sign. It wasn't even a banner. The principal of a local private school lived across the street from me. We could have bought a house in any neighborhood. We could have lived a block away, but we he bought a house there and we bought a house there, and um, we weren't friends, but his daughter babysat for us, and he knew I was a musician. And so when the band teacher position opened up, and it was just part time, he asked me if I was interested. When I showed up for the interview, there was chaos everywhere. They were kind of running at the time under a leadership style of putting out whatever fire was the biggest fire that needed to be put out for today. So even though I was supposed to be interviewed that day, I was never interviewed. I got to observe the band class. I got to teach a little bit of it, and the only person who was in there with me was the band teacher. So afterward, they asked me if I was interested in the job, and um, I ended up taking that part-time job. Yay! I was able to quit delivering pizzas, and that ended up being a good fit for me. But then some crazy things happened. A few weeks after I was hired, I went in to fill out some paperwork. And while I was there, the band teacher who thought I was being brought on part-time to help her out, she was there full-time. She found out that she was like, I didn't get my direct deposit for the middle of July. And that's when they told her she was being fired. So I'm storing all this info in the back of my mind and thinking, what kind of place am I about to start working for? The then a week or two after that, I got my first paycheck back in the day when they actually gave out paychecks often, and it bounced. There was not enough money to pay me. It turned out they what they did was move all the funds to another account for payroll, and it was just a few cents short, and so that's why it bounced. But it did leave me wondering what kind of place was I about to work for, because I hadn't even started teaching there. Um, but it made me realize that I quickly realized that's what I was called to do. Absolutely love teaching, and I settled into teaching and perfected my craft. And I told you a little bit about my weakness was classroom discipline, but became a student of classroom discipline. Um, but there came a time where I knew I needed to grow from that position but I didn't have my teaching license. It was a private school, so I didn't need my license. And when I would talk to professors at music schools, they would always say, well, quit your job and come here for 2 years to our college and we can get you your teaching license. And I just was not able to do that. I had 4 small kids at that time. But I found a program through Western State Colorado University that allowed me to teach and get my teaching license at the same time. So that brings me to the job search process. That was 2004, 2005. I went through that program. I got my teaching license and I decided it was time to find another teaching job. I looked for openings on school district websites. I searched music education job websites. I networked with friends. I looked on local job search sites. And basically, I did everything I knew to find out about jobs. And I applied for 25 to 30 openings. Sometimes it was slow going, and sometimes there were weeks when nothing opened up. Eventually, I was called for 6 interviews and I received 2 job offers. Those were not the right jobs for me. One would have entailed moving to Fort Myer, Florida, and my wife and I weren't ready to make that commitment. And another one was in Northeast Colorado. That one looked like a really good position. But when my wife looked at the possibilities for her as a dental hygienist, there were no openings there. In fact, they only had one hygienist in town who was there 1 day a week, and she had been there for 15 or 20 years. So I turned that down, and I had already notified my school I was leaving, and here it is the 3rd week of May, and I have no job prospects. I was getting discouraged, and I really had to call on my faith, and nothing happened for the next 2 weeks. But finally, there was an opening at Falcon High School. I applied, I was called in for an interview, and that was the one I had told you about where the student of mine, her dad taught at that school. So he put in a good word for me, and they offered me the job about 3 weeks later. I was the 5th or 6th band teacher there in as many years. It had become a revolving door. In fact, some of my colleagues said, "Are you sure that you want to go teach there?" And they talked about it being the revolving door of band teachers who were there a year and some even less than a year. But I decided to give it a 3-year commitment, and I spent 13 years there and had a very successful time during that time. So here's the job hunting math I have for you. 25 to 30 applications turned into 6 interviews and turned into 3 job offers, which one of them I picked. In 2018, I did the same thing. I was leaving, it was time to leave Falcon High School, and I had 25 or 30 applications, 5 to 6 interviews, 3 job offers. 2 of them were I loved the job, I loved the mission, I loved the school, I loved the principal. Was going to be a good challenge for me, but the way the craziness in education works sometimes is that they were significant pay cuts, like a 40% pay cut. So I turned those down, and I ended up in D11, where I finished out my career and had a job there that gave me a chance to do something totally new. So I want to encourage you that you can't just say, I applied at this one place, it's my dream job, but they're not calling me back. Or I applied at these 2 places. If you are looking for a job, if you hit 25 or 30 places, you should be getting some interviews out of that. If you get to that point of 25 or 30 and you have not gotten any interviews, then you have to say, is there something I'm missing on my resume? Is there something I'm missing in the application process? As much of a pain as those online applications are, take your time with them. One of the techniques I used to overcome the monotony of it is I created a Word document that had most of the stuff I needed in there, so I could go back in and copy and paste and then paste it into the online application. So I wouldn't have to answer the same question on 20 different applications. If you get through that process and you've done 30 applications and you're getting interviews and you've gotten 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 interviews and you're not getting any job offers, then you have to decide, am I missing something in the interview that I could change? And those are always hard things to do. I am someone who rejection is really hard for me. So when I would get the rejection of not having an interview and a rejection of not getting the job offer, those were always hard for me. But sometimes you just have to push through that and keep on doing with what you're doing and examining what is going wrong if something's going wrong in that process. Do we have any questions? Well, thank you so much for having me on, Jessica. That concludes my presentation. If we don't have any questions from anyone.
Well, excellent. Any final thoughts? Here's one that just came in. Does it look bad to have so many jobs on a resume?
I think it can. So the 13 years that I was at Falcon High School, I had another colleague who had been at about 10 different schools. And I always wondered how he was able to continue getting those jobs. He didn't do anything terrible, but he wasn't doing anything great either. And he always talked about how terrible the principal he had was. But we all have experienced that. So I think in that case too, it might be better for example, the young lady I was talking about earlier who had a lot of different jobs, some that she was only at a week or two. I don't think she should put those on her resume that she was there for a week. It looks bad. No matter what the reason, even if you left because they were asking you to do something that was unethical, it still looks bad to just have been somewhere for a week. So I think you can sometimes change the way you do the resume. The typical resume we think of is a chronological resume where we say from this year to this year, I worked here, from this year to this year. So you might even consider more of a skills-based resume rather than listing your chronological things of what you did. Just talk about some of the things you've achieved at different places.
That's great. And then a follow-up question. How does a person who's been blacklisted do things differently? So I'm not sure exactly what would cause the blacklisting, but I don't know if there's any extra clarification on that question.
I think it could be it makes it a little bit more difficult because some fields are smaller in nature. So maybe you have to think maybe outside the box. So if you feel like you've been blacklisted in certain companies, you can think about how those skills can be used in a slightly different area. For example, teaching is my strength area, so it's kind of where I think about. I wasn't blacklisted, but when I retired 2 years ago, I was like, I'm not sure if I want to stay in public education or in teaching K through 12 education. And so I had actually applied at Springs Rescue Mission. They were looking for a director of education, and that would have been totally outside my normal contacts. So if I had been blacklisted in education, for example, that might have been a good area to go.
And I really like what you shared about that self-reflection component. Does this industry fit me if there's a lot of turnover or if there's been a lot of conflict? But it looked like Vicky, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. So let's say it's your first job. How do you know it's a good place to work at?
How do you know it's a good place to work at? Think
Yeah,
about
if
what
it's
are
your,
you interested in? What do you like to do? And how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 14.
14.
Yes.
So you may not know yet what you like and what you're good at. So if it's something that doesn't seem repulsive to you, sometimes you can just get experience doing things that other people don't want to do. So my first job, it wasn't an official job, but my mom worked at an Italian restaurant and I worked there washing the dishes. Did I really love washing the dishes? No, but it gave me a lot of experience. I learned a lot of things about how people work together in that position, and learned about things I didn't want to do. Like the lady who ran the restaurant was just very cheap, so I got to see all kinds of like wrong things she did with the restaurant. Eventually, I worked up to becoming a waiter and made more money, and I found that to be more enjoyable because I liked working with people. And I'm going to say, as a 14-year-old, in this day and age, if you find some things, depending on if your parents are willing to say it's okay, find things that people don't want to do, like yard work and housework. The it's I know we live in a different time, but I used to go around door to door with my lawnmower and say, "Hey, do you want your lawn cut today?" And 20% or 30% of the people would say yes, the other ones would say no, but I would just keep going and find the people who wanted that done. You might do babysitting or dog walking or picking up poop in people's yards. And you might find if you could do something like that on your own, you would actually make more than you would in a regular job. So just some
Okay.
ideas for you there.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You
I
know,
have a
say,
question.
Anybody?
oh
I
yeah,
see.
Jody's got her hand raised and Aisha. Yeah. Or Aisha first.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask real quick, when you apply for a job and maybe you didn't get it or you don't know if you got it, but you keep seeing the same job posted, do you think it's worth continuing to reapply and maybe adjusting your resume or whatever? Once again, you don't know why it's still posted, but what is that something, what do you advise in that situation if that is a job that seems to fit you and you continue to see it? But
I
you
would
don't.
say I've actually experienced that before in the latest job search a couple of years ago that I did. And I would say reach out one or two times through email or something not so intrusive and just say, hey, I see the position is still listed. I'm interested in pursuing this further. And then if you don't hear back from them, I think in a way it's because they're either afraid or maybe a little bit wimpy to just say, hey, we're not going to hire you or we don't want to hire you. So I would say just kind of a quiet way of following up with them. And sometimes it may be that when I think about the case for me, this might sound weird now, but sometimes when you have hindsight, some of those things I didn't get, I'm thinking, I'm really glad I didn't get those. And sometimes it's because the people are just bad at following up. So this is when a connection comes in good. So that Falcon High School position that I was at for 13 years and my friend taught there, I hadn't heard from them for 3 weeks. And he kept telling me, he said the interview went well. And so I reached out to him and I said, Donnie, you said the interview went well, but I haven't heard back. And he said, let me check with them because they still haven't hired someone. And the next day they called and offered me the job. They were just so overwhelmed that they were looking at other things they had to get. They were putting out fires and not able to really look towards the future.
Right, and Jody's got a question.
It's actually Tom this time.
Oh, Tom.
James, sure appreciate your time and experience. And they say it's an average of 6 to 9 months now between career changes. So ideally, it's actually good to look for a job while you're still working in an ideal world. And it was interesting to see, you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but I enjoyed the process where not only are you being interviewed. And obviously, your resume is for the purpose of getting an interview. Interview is really the goal that you're looking for. The resume is really just to get to that point. And so interviewing skills are a whole new set beyond just application writing and resume cover letter writing. It seems to be that's two different skill sets. But once you're in that interview, it was so enjoyable for me to learn about so many careers that I have never had a chance to look into. And I had more fun, and more of the interviews and some of the recruitment process was actually interviewing the employers and finding out about what makes them tick, what are some of the aptitudes and personalities and skill sets that lead towards a good career person in that field. And so I learned so much. It was actually quite a joy to do that because, I mean, there's recruiters and there's HR people, and not many people take the chance to find out about them and a little bit more about their field. And so I think it's an enjoyable two-way process because you're both looking at each other. And so take the time to really enjoy learning about other employers, other careers, other skill sets. It's a good time, but I mean it is the long haul. It seems 6 to 9 months is quite a while.
Yeah. I love what you said about that, about making the connections and learning different things. And I think sometimes you can actually, if you think about I can't say that I was like this when I was younger. This has been a process of getting to this point as I've gotten older. But I feel like now I can go in and I'm looking to try to make connections even for them. If I'm not the right person, hey, maybe this other person, I know just the person who would be, I'm not a good fit, but I know this person who would. I actually took a bold stand in 2005 when I was interviewing, and I won't mention the school district, but there was a school district that said similar to what the charter school I'm at now said, and they said, we want to build a band program. But the way they did the job description, I was like, this is too overwhelming. You're not gonna be able to build a band program. So after the interview, I actually sat down and wrote a proposal for them, and told them, I don't think your plan, the way you have it, is going to work. Here's what you might want to look at. And this would help you to build a band program. It was I can say that it was a K through 12 school, and the person was expected to teach K through 12. And you can't build a band program and do all of that. So I proposed some things, and they said no. They did respond to my proposal, and they said no, we don't. We want to build the band program and do these 40 other things. And I've kind of followed I was very excited about. I could see myself going there and spending 20 years there. And what I noticed over the last 20 years is that they've had about 16 or 18 music teachers, and they still don't have a band program. And it's because they're not willing to change. But if they had been, if they had thought, and it wouldn't necessarily have had to be me, but if they had just changed the way that what they were trying to fill, they could have done some good things there.
I appreciate you sharing that story. I think that also goes back to the question about how do you know if it's a good fit or a good environment? So you didn't even have to be employed by them to know, you know what I'm saying? And then just checking back periodically. I think that that's good for our youngsters who are starting their careers.
And James, it looks like there was a private chat message sent just to you. If you're able to take a look at that. I was thinking of one thing that Asta was mentioning, and trying to get into some fields where there's a lot of applications are sent in and not a lot of feedback. And I was thinking, and then kind of again, this self-reflection, trying to find what fits you well, what fits the mission well, and volunteer work, I think could possibly open some doors, the networking, getting to know people, libraries, schools, even my kiddos have been volunteering in a bike repair shop, figuring out if that's a good fit for them. And then also getting to know a lot of people, and then they're getting some bike coaching gigs from that. So yeah, just a lot of different techniques. So I don't know if you're able to find that chat, James.
I see it.
Okay. I'll let you
Um,
read that there. Looks a little hard to get to.
While you're looking, I know that Jessica had mentioned about the volunteerism and things of that sort. Do you think that that's a good way to get recommendations? So if you're at the beginning and getting your first jobs and stuff, using kind of those volunteer gigs and freebies to kind of build up your references. So even if you're not qualified, however the employer sees it, that you have somebody who can actually speak to your skill set.
I think that's something that could be really good, especially for younger people who who are just getting started, or maybe people who are like have been out of the workforce for a while, because those can be sometimes connections, because some places have paid positions and volunteer positions. I'm on the board of Sarah's Home, which is a home that rescues sex trafficked girls, and we have quite a few volunteers, and we have quite a few paid staff too, and sometimes those volunteers have moved over to the paid staff.
Any other questions from anyone out there?
Oh, wait, did he find the chat? Because I want to make sure that nobody's questions ignored, whether it was private or public. Were you able to find the question?
Yes, I found it.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, James. This was so much great information. And families, thank you for being excellent participators, and thanks for leaving your cameras on. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish the recording right now, but we're gonna stay on to do our surveys. So hold on just a moment.